well, to decide who is opening up the meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. I'll open up. Ike Squale, Siemna Siaya, Enthapiscot Sewa, Isepka Quanzalap Skikip Patanaquale, Titatalatus Nanemok Mastimok, Yahawashista Tamakatanaquale. Good day, respected friends and relatives. My name is Scott Saywell. I'm superintendent of Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. It's nice to be with you today. I thank you all for gathering here today, and I'd like to give my highest gratitude and appreciation to the people of Snuneymuxw. I hope you will take a moment to acknowledge the territory on which you are situated this evening, likely Snanawas or Staminas First Nations. We are here this evening, again, thank you for joining. We're here this evening to engage you in a conversation concerning school capacity issues in the north end of Nanaimo. Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh has a short presentation this evening, and then we'll be opening it up for questions. We have a number of other people here this evening, both from facilities and the finance department to assist as well. Mr. Walsh will probably introduce them. As well, we have our board chair here this evening, Charlene McKay. Thank you for being with us, Charlene, who will be listening in. With that, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Walsh. I'm the Secretary Treasurer. I also want to take a moment to recognize Pete Sabo, who heads up our facilities department, and Tanya Sutton, who's heading up our finance and helps with our enrollment projections and staffing our schools on a year-to-year basis. Dale, you've introduced yourself, I think. And so just want to, I guess I'll get right off the bat here. So how did we get here and what are we doing here this evening? So tonight is the result of work that's being done as a result of the long-range facilities plan of the board. So approximately a year ago, the board adopted a long-range facilities plan focused on how we get to seismic safety in our schools, as well as trying to address capacity issues as they come. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that our region is one of the fastest growing in the country, and the North End is probably one of the fastest growing regions of the fastest growing regions. And so what that's leading us to do is try to be proactive in how we're going to address these issues as we move forward. So we started off, of course, with the North End, and the reason we did is because of that quick growth. It's also because one of the things that we're trying to avoid as much as we can is really adding portables to schools if we can. Not that the modern portables aren't great amenities to schools. They even have air conditioning, but they really impact the ability of the site to have proper play space. If we overfill a school, there might not be enough amenity space left in that school to support the population. And so one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing school in the district is Departure Bay, which really got us rolling. So last year, Departure Bay, despite COVID, added a portable. This year, we're actually projecting that Departure Bay is the only school that's going to require additional portable, with the exception of ND at our secondary level, and that's not even determined yet. And so that got us thinking, is that school is already on the way to 5 and projected to go to 7 portables if we don't do something about it. So how are we going to try to proactively address that as enrollment continues to increase? In our long-range facilities plan, we do have a report from a demographer or a geospatial engineer that shows Nanaimo Ladysmith growing significantly over the next decade and the North End growing significantly. So what we did is we came together and we created a number of scenarios to send out to the community for comment. The intention of tonight and the intention of the earlier consultation and the variety of emails that we've been getting is to take that information and create a report to the board, likely with the recommended outcome, for the board to consider and implement or not implement in order to address those issues. I'm going to go through some of the variables as we go through. We tried to keep our document as high level and understandable as possible, so hopefully we succeeded in that. Tonight, happy if Dale is going to be taking those questions as we go, and if I see them, maybe I'll stop as well. And we've got the team here able to respond to specifics if we get into them. So I'm just going to jump into the presentation, if that's okay. And again, most of you have probably seen this document. I just want to give a kudos to our communications team for such fine work they're doing in the district on these documents. Very, very impressed. So we've got our chair, of course, is just outlining the variety of issues and how proactive the board is trying to be in addressing these issues, and just highlights where we're at. Importantly, what we've done is we've taken the scenarios in this document and we've put the lens on them of 10 different considerations. And so you'll see at the end, we kind of put them through a numerical filter and come up with what we would suggest based off of these factors is the best, second best, third best, etc. a scenario for the board to consider. And so the speed in which the district can implement the scenario. So scenario is not that useful if you can't do it for a decade. Capital costs. So is it going to cost the board money, the Ministry of Education money? We know we're desperate to get a new ND. So if we were going to get a new school theoretically somewhere else, does that take away our opportunity to meet other needs? Are the buildings we're talking about seismically safe, and how will that impact our program? Operational costs. So schools close because they have significant funds that are associated merely with the school being open. Principals, clerical staff, a variety of those base costs, custodial. So if we did this scenario, what would that do? And then what will the board have to consider as a trade-off at the end of the day for that? Suitability of the impacted site. So again, we want to expand a site on a small footprint. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Walkability. So we're working towards environmental sustainability, and how do these scenarios impact walkability? Impact on French immersion, a high demand program in the district. And so if we did, and Hammond Bay will be the big one, how does that impact access to French? If we did something now, will that solve our problems in a decade, or will we have to be back at the table deciding another potential solution to deal with further growth? How are building conditions? And finally, if we did take the step to open a new school or to open a previously closed school, are we going to be back here in a decade talking about potential closure, which is obviously something we want to avoid? So the scenarios, very quickly, you've seen the document. So one is dual tracking Hammond Bay Elementary, École Hammond Bay. So right now it is a French immersion only school. It is going to be expanded to 500 and I believe 36 seats, and which will create about 150 extra seats, a little over that, than currently are housed at the school, because it already has portables to support our current population. So if we were to dual track it, what we would end up doing, and I know these are pretty small here, but what we would end up doing is we would take the border of Frank-Ney and we would shrink it and shrink Departure Bay and create a catchment border. And this, please, this is approximate. We would have work to continue to do to determine the appropriate neighborhood respecting final boundaries associated with these. And so these are just for consultation purposes or discussion purposes only. And so this is approximately what a boundary would look like if we were to do that. And then you'll see what it would do is it would completely solve future capacity issues at Ney, Hammond Bay, Departure Bay, not completely solve them at Randerson and McGurr in the circumstances. And you'll see Pleasant Valley is a fast growing issue that we will be consulting about in the near future. So this could happen immediately, well, almost immediately. We're a little delayed on getting Hammond Bay finished, but it'll be finished in fall. So we could actually start this really next year or 2023, 2023. No capital costs. We've already got the facility. Seismic safety, half of it will be in excellent seismic shape. We will have to come back at some point, likely, and upgrade and the rest of the facility. Operational costs, this is positive on operational costs because we already run the school, we already have the custodian, we already have the clerical. Suitability at the site's going to be tight, no matter if they're French immersion or English students attending. So that's just the nature of a 530 kid school. Walkability, this is one of the better scenarios with respect to walkability. It creates a situation where kids are going from 4.5 kilometers to get to school to cut that in basically half. French immersion, though, there would be a significant impact lessening access to French immersion in the district. And future growth, it takes care of certainly the immediate term growth. It may not solve if we get significant growth, as the remaining red shows. And with respect to closure, unlikely. Well, we wouldn't be looking at closing a school of 500. The risk, of course, would be if the English program did shrink, then we might have to look at an alternative or an unbalanced French immersion English program. So that means 3/4, for instance, of the school's French immersion, leaving a small cohort of English, which is not ideal in a French immersion scenario. So that would be the worst case. 2 is, excuse me, opening Rutherford, and then, of course, moving Frank Nay's boundaries east. So we see this as an example here. So we still have kids walking significant different distances to Departure Bay and very significant distances to Frank Nay, but it certainly covers off Departure Bay's capacity issues and certainly creates a walkable area in Rutherford. Again, caveat that these are not the final boundaries necessarily. And so speed, well, Rutherford's being used as Pleasant Valley as we speak, so it could be done as soon as we would have a plan in place to do it, as early as September 2023. I will note we are monitoring our enrollment as we speak. It's coming in a little bit light, so the desperation to make the decision if we were to open Rutherford for September 2023, the board might have some options on that front, depending on how September looks for enrollment. Capital costs, nothing immediate. Seismic, Rutherford will have to be upgraded at some point, so we would theoretically have to move the school away to a swing school and move it back, but that's probably not for a number of years. And the big impact on seismic is Rutherford would be taken away from the district as a potential swing school accepting school. So we'd have to go use perhaps Woodlands or perhaps Dufferin as an alternative example. Operational costs, this would be significant, a minimum of 400,000, depending on how we staff the school and depending on what we take away from the neighboring schools. So for instance, we would likely take specialist time from McGurr, from Frank Nay, from Randerson, and move it into Rutherford. And so 400 is the kind of minimum cost we'd be looking at, and it could be up to 700, 650, 700. And we're just finalizing those numbers for the report to the board. Suitability, it's been a school, it is a school, it could continue to be a school. Walkability, again, generally good, not positive for the Hammond Bay cohort of English students, but definitely for the Rutherford area. French immersion, no negative impact. Certainly supports future growth. Now, if Departure Bay neighborhood continues to grow, we might still have to do something there, but generally it's positive. Rutherford, if the demographics completely shifted, I guess it could be at some risk, but I would imagine that the district would take some boundary shifts to try to solve that from a future closure. So we wouldn't be coming to the community to close a school, open a school, and close a school all within 2 decades. So scenario 3, I really don't probably need to say too much about this scenario, I think, because really it's not being supported by much. There's a significant cost, and the timeliness of this particular scenario is very unlikely. in the near term. So this scenario we may want to keep on our radar, particularly if growth exceeds our expectations or birth rates change, etc. But I won't go into too much depth with respect to a new school. You will note, I will just note for a moment that we chose not a realistic location necessarily either. We just, that's right. There's a parcel that was for sale in Lindley Valley, and we plumped it there, and just to see what walk routes would look like and what the boundary line would look like. So theoretically, if we were to look at a new school, there's parcels of land here in Stevenson Point, as well as a little bit kind of up the hill at Oak Ridge. So again, not the most likely scenario to be supported. And finally, expand Departure Bay. And so I think I mentioned at the beginning, we've got 4 portables. We're about to install our 5th. In addition, we're looking at potentially more in the future. And so an example here is Departure Bay would be covered off. McGurr is still okay. Randerson is, we need to come up with some kind of solution for Randerson, but perhaps that means more kids go to NA. So Departure Bay certainly covers off the issue we're facing in the short term. So, however, though, we did not get support for Departure Bay expansion in our capital plan. So the earliest we could get support is next spring, and then however many years after that it takes to plan and install an expansion. We would likely be expected to pay for part of the expansion, assume 10%. So that's expensive. Seismic safety, Departure Bay wouldn't get a seismic. We would try to time them together, but it might not happen. So that still need to be done at some point. Operational, this is our cheapest, no impact option out of all of them. Suitability of the impacted site, Departure Bay is not a good site for its current 400 kids because the drop off and pickup, given how humongous the current boundary is not very amenable to the amount of kids that are getting dropped off. So that needs to be fixed. Walkability, again, we'd be creating a very large or maintaining a very large catchment. And so the expansion, it doesn't hurt what's there, but it certainly doesn't improve walkability. Impact on French immersion, again, no impact. Future growth, it covers our immediate term issue. It may not cover our long-term issue. Potential closure, there'd be no circumstance where Departure Bay would close under this expansion. The only notation is, though, Solaire is a school. Can't fit many kids in the first place, but if people were able to access a newer building, for instance, would that make them go? We don't know. So there could be some impact. So finally, when we go through the scenarios, and I want to apologize right off, we had mixed up the operational costs of Hammond Bay and Rutherford. And so in our initial document, Rutherford actually came out slightly ahead of Hammond Bay off this basis, but that was because we were giving Rutherford a 1 on operational cost, when Rutherford is actually the most expensive from an operational perspective. So when you add them all up, Hammond Bay, just purely off the 10 criteria and the way staff have interpreted those 10 criteria, Hammond Bay is slightly better than Rutherford. The new school is very unrealistic, and Departure Bay is not got a great score either for some of the reasons that were presented. So there is it in brief. Pete, Tanya, I don't know if I've glossed over anything that warrants before we look into the questions.
No, I'm okay from my part, Mark. Thank you.
Same, nothing to add.
Okay. Dale, do you want me to jump right in?
Sure, jump right in. However, before you do that, I just wanted to welcome the guests that had come in after we had started the meeting, and I just wanted to remind everyone who's joined us, the way for you to ask your question is through the chat function. And if you are on a desktop, there is a chat window that you would click on. There's that bubble. Chat bubble that you would click on, and you can type your message in. The same works on your device. If you are on a mobile device, just look for that menu option. There's 3 dots. If you don't see it, click on the 3 dots, and there should be a chat function for you there as well. And again, please type in your question, and I will make note of it. And then Mark or whoever is on the Teams call right now will be able to answer that for you. If not, we'll get back to you. Thank you.
So the first question was any consideration given to stacking the scenarios? For example, a quick win in brackets Rutherford combined with a new school in Stevenson Point or Departure Bay. So there's nothing that would prevent the board from saying, yes, we want to do this. And then we also want to, do another scenario. A good example of that might be, you could open the Rutherford example and still expand Departure Bay. And then you're now probably have 0 portables in the North End, and they're able to be reallocated in relatively quick fashion. And in fact, when you look at, if North End growth continues, we may well have to do multiple scenarios. So yes, but we didn't want to present kind of overwhelming options to the board to say, well, here's the $700,000 operational hit to open Rutherford, and here's the $3 million capital hit to do this scenario. Let's do them both, just because we think we do have some time. It's those kind of latent growth that's already existing and then the growth that's happening we want to be able to address. And based off of the numbers, we think that, as you can see, the Departure Bay example largely does it. The Hammond Bay example largely solves the problem, where the Rutherford example largely solves it. So we don't actually think we necessarily even need to at one time. Sorry, questions.
Sarah had a second question.
Would like to understand how walkability scores were tabulated. Not clear on how scenario 3 gets a poor walkability score when it improves walkabilities for the growing population in Lindley/Stevenson Point. And so you obviously know the area very well, and so really the walkability is a 3, and the reason is partially because of where we located the school. And so, as you know, the area, this is all Crown land and unlikely to be developed for any time in the near future. So what we're looking at is these students. Oh, I'm messing around with my cursor and you can't see that. So I'm going to bring up the document again. I apologize, everyone. So you'll see here, we put the school kind of on the most westerly parcel of privately owned land. And so all of this is Crown land and is unlikely to be developed for any short period of time. So, but it also means that we've got a large mountain/hill right here. And so the walkability for the kids, at least in the draft catchment, is actually quite far here. So it works really well for Golden Oaks, and it works really well probably for parts of Stevenson Point. But as it stands, it's not as walk friendly as you would hope it would be. If we did have it here, there's a parcel in Stevenson Point that's privately owned. That might improve things, frankly, because then you'd be along Hammond Bay. But that's why it came in 3. But of course, many students would be far closer to home. The Golden Oaks and the Oak Ridge developments are great examples of who have significant. They go way farther than Frank Ney students do, even at the western boundary of where Rutherford is. So that was the thinking. Hammond Bay is not walkable from the catchment outline, and the walkability score is quite high. To make it walkable would be taking all the Frank Ney new catchment. It seems these were data-driven analysis without calibration. Will these angles be refined? Sorry. So yes, we will. If indeed the board proceeds to go down one of the specific scenarios, that's when we're going to take the time to calibrate them so they're recognizing various walkability paths, bring in the city to have a look at our maps to make sure that they make sense from bikeability, etc. And then we also have our demographers able to do some of that work as well. This was somewhat a rough way that we could fit the number of kids that are going to support those schools in or support the schools into catchments, but the calibration would absolutely happen. We just didn't want to use the time and expense to do that in advance, because we also, so let's assume the board decides that new school is the one they want. We would then take the opportunity to go out and consult with the local community to get a sense of, okay, well, no, you think that's walkable, that's not safe, or the city thinks there's going to be a road here in 5 years. Well, great, that's going to change our thinking. So, you know, and the other reality is the board might choose none of the above as the end result. So that's the reason that we didn't go quite that level of depth at this time. So what is the current demand and availability for families who want French immersion in Nanaimo? I would like to better understand the impact on access to French immersion with the Hammond Bay option. So right now we have a dual track at North Oyster. We have a single track at Pauline Hare, which I believe Tanya and Pete, you're going to nod if you believe that the Pauline Hare is full. We have dual track at Quarterway, which I also believe is full. Oh, we have a few spots at Quarterway, very few spots at Quarterway. And then Hammond Bay, which is a single track, which is also full. Sorry, Pete, go ahead.
Well, maybe I'm having a moment, but Quarterway, is that not single track?
Oh, sorry, did I say dual track?
Yeah.
Sorry, the only dual track school is North Oyster. The rest are single track schools, and they are all full. If we chose the Hammond Bay dual track option, not only would it limit the access to these expanded spaces, we would actually have to shrink our access to French immersion. So right now, I believe we are at 336 at a Cole Hammond Bay, and they are using portables to use 336. The expansion, what's our final capacity with expansion, Pete, if you want to take a moment?
Yeah, from a functional operational perspective, it's approximately 522 students.
So we're going to add less than 200 spaces that would be available. If we were to do English, we would likely want to create a track that's about 50-50. So we would have to essentially take our current population of 336 thereabouts and drop that over time to approximately 270 as an example. It wouldn't prevent the board from looking at other French immersion expansion opportunities, dual tracks, etc. But that's why Hammond Bay would limit it. And Hammond Bay does have a wait list. And certainly on a year-to-year basis, one of the reasons Hammond Bay was expanded in the way that it was to take kids from Departure Bay and Randerson and Ney and McGurr, who are all at or above capacity. The problem we're finding with that particular relying on Hammond Bay to take those kids is we can't actually predict where they're going to come from on a day-to-day basis. So the school district at this time does not say, hey, Departure Bay, you're way too full. We are going to prioritize French immersion access to the kids in that catchment because we want to alleviate. We do not do that. We take a lottery system. And so year to year, most of the kids are probably going to be Departure Bay and Frank Ney still. So it does do its job, but it's not going to be doing its job enough to alleviate the Departure Bay overcrowding. So if Departure Bay has had the biggest increase in numbers, why has Rock City not been in the discussion at all? It is geographically the closest school to Departure Bay and currently has no portables. So Rock City does have portables. Pete, do you have that number?
It's got 3 physical portables, and I don't have my finger on exactly how many are occupied. One of those 3 may be vacant.
Yeah, so and Rock City does have a little bit of capacity. We'll acknowledge that. You know, and if is it Rock City that goes up to Lindley Valley there? There's a lot of development likely single family dwellings, with suites. So we're probably going to see some enrollment increase there, at least we're projected to. So if we were planning to be static for the next decade, our solution would have been to change the boundary at Departure Bay and Rock City and change the boundary at Solaire and Departure Bay and move kids away from Departure Bay. But because not only are we not static, we're growing, we weren't looking at that as the kind of main solution to the issue. However, we could easily move 20, 30, 40 kids from Departure Bay to Rock City if the feedback is suggesting that the community would rather have us, paint around the edges. We could do that as an alternative. It just won't solve our big issue in 2030. You did mention Departure Bay School, the parking is terrible. How many children attend the school that are not in the area to go there? Can you cap it to local people? How do you stop parking on the side of the road at the stop sign? So can we cap it to local people? Yes. And in fact, we have capped it to local people. The board had some foresight a number of years ago to do that. So when we look at the population of Departure Bay, we do see a number of kids that are out of catchment. And those kids are mainly in the higher grades because they were there when Departure Bay was taking out of catchment kids in. And we will never ask a kid to leave a school. We don't want a family to have to leave that school. So they've been grandfathered in the school. At our lower grades, however, we do not see as much out of catchment because we say no for the most part, not always, but for the most part. The place that does happen, though, is we do get kids that move. And again, we don't ask them to leave if they move. And it's not something we're contemplating. So really, we have capped it, and it's kind of, there'll always be kids that don't live there, but it's likely because they've moved away. How do we stop people parking on the side of the road at the stop sign? Pete, I don't know if you have a bit of background on the work we're doing with the city. I will say we do have our eyes on if we do a seismic upgrade or an expansion, we would not do that without solving, or at least partially solving, the parking issues. But Pete, do you have any more insight?
Yeah, but thank you, Mr. Walsh. Back in 2018, we did a active school travel plan for the school, and we have since gone back with the city to revisit that plan and to look at areas where we do have traffic student interactions that are unwanted, and that work is ongoing with the city. And I'm not quite certain the area being spoke about, but we are looking at parking on the side of the road, particularly on the west side of the school going up Departure Bay. Thank you.
So from a parent of a child at Hammond Bay and talking to other parents in the school, most of us agree it should stay as French only. There's a huge demand for French in Nanaimo, and it would be better using other schools like Rutherford or Woodlands as another option for English for kids. So thank you for the comment, and certainly the option of Rutherford is one that is put as a scenario, and one of the contemplating factors is the limit of limiting access to French immersion, which is in demand, and no doubt about that. Solaire should not close as millions have just been spent on it. I think number 2 would be the best option. So certainly I can be very clear, our long-range facilities plan is not contemplating any closure of any school. We will actively look at boundaries before that happens. And in fact, with respect to Solaire, which is one of our few schools that's actually projecting a decline, we are looking at ways that we can actually influence development in the area to perhaps encourage family growth or family-friendly housing to bolster that. So very clear, Solaire is not closing. And yes, we are spending absolute millions, and a school is going to be seismically safe, and that's going to be in our long-term plans for many, 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 many years. So how do you plan to incorporate the Green Thumb development, which intends to put kids in Randerson, McGurr, Dover, which are already over capacity? So great, thank you very much for that. So we are using 10-year projections, and I highly encourage folks to have a read of relatively dry enrollment report done by a company called Liquor Geospatial. They know where growth is happening from the city directly. And so some of the Green Thumb is going to be incorporated that because I think it was foreseen that could happen. Some is not, though, because we're only looking 10 years out. And I don't think in reality, Green Thumb is going to be complete, at least fully fleshed out in 10 years. So Rutherford does solve some of that issue, there's no doubt. The other, concept, what if Woodgrove, has a change to add residential if it does? There's a number of places in that particular zone that could add density. Pleasant Valley is also one of our in 10 years crisis schools that today we're okay, but that we are actively looking at. So part of that would be Rutherford potentially, particularly if the development is family friendly, which the type of development is unlikely to have the same kind of family production as, say, parts of Lindley Valley would be. But we are contemplating that, and certainly moving a bit of Randerson to Uplands at some point would be in the works, as well as potentially Rutherford. So that is contemplated. I do not think that shrinking French immersion would be a good idea. And again, important comment for, I think, our board to hear, and that will be reflected in the report from staff. Recommend that we reopen Rutherford in September 2022. Just in response to that, staff, I think that is highly, highly, highly unlikely, and I would not want our community to get the expectations to open a school in May, June, July, August, September, 5 months' time is likely unrealistic. And so what our plan puts forward is the earliest contemplation would be September of 2023. However, again, as noted, we are even contemplating, depending on how our numbers bear out in September, that there could be even more runway, but that will be for the board to consider. If Hammond Bay was to become dual track, would you consider opening an additional French immersion site? So that would certainly be for the board, I think, to contemplate if they were seeking to meet demand. I know a number of people have said, well, why, if you're going to dual track Hammond Bay because you're creating a little bit more walkability, why don't you dual track Rutherford and do the same thing? We haven't really contemplated that very actively because, again, from an expense perspective and how quickly we need those seats perspective, multiple at the same time is not required, but nothing would prevent that kind of expansion in future. Please consider that schools are also centers for community and greatly strengthen neighborhoods. The Rutherford neighborhood has suffered due to the closure in more ways than just the loss of a school. I would say that, again, the board will see that comment. I would also say that the board in the long-range facilities plan has actually contemplated opening the district to amenities at school sites, and Reimagine Nanaimo has specifically incorporated that kind of concept, not necessarily at Rutherford, but more broadly. So I think that the comment from a general perspective is well taken and reflected by the long-range facilities plan. When you are talking about redrawing boundaries, will students have the option to be grandfathered in their current school? If so, how will the upper grades at the new school be filled in the short term, thinking of the first two options mostly? That is a great question. So maybe I'll just try to back it up. So two things. When we change a boundary, it is highly unlikely that we would be asking a student to leave a school because we change a boundary. So let's say we moved some of Departure Bay to Rock City, and your child's in grade 3 at Departure Bay. We are not going to come and ask you to move from Departure Bay to Rock City. So just right off the bat, that's important to state. With respect to the option of opening a new school, however, what we would foresee is a school opening committee. And this is why even in, we wanted to open a school quickly, it takes that kind of time. Because we need to decide whether we would open the school with kindergarten, kindergarten grade 1, kindergarten grade 1, 2, and 3, or a full K-7 school. And if you open a full K-7 school, well, at that time, the board has little choice but to direct people to move schools, because we cannot operate a school with 2 grade 7s in it, or 3 like voluntary grade 6s. So that's going to be a community discussion that would happen as a result of the end result of whatever this consultation is. In the case of Hammond Bay, it's a little bit easier because we already have a fresh cohort of French immersion in the school. We have a kindergarten, a 3rd kindergarten cohort started this year. Next year, there'll be KN1. So if we move to English track, we probably would start, K1, 2, and as that last cohort of French immersion aged out, we would continue to expand our English is probably the way that would work. The unfortunate part of the Hammond Bay expansion is there's actually, ironically, going to be classroom space empty for the next couple of years at the same time that we have schools burgeoning with portables. So that's going to be subject to the consultation when any decision is made. And I'm sorry for that incredibly wishy-washy answer, but really that's the kind of conversation that's complex and involves the school communities that we're impacting. 12 community members on the consult, should be more. How is it decided? 5 on Teams would be the time, most parents. So with respect to the consultation, we wanted to make sure that we had this opportunity for people to come on. We've had all kinds of questions that we're trying to answer generally. We think that we've been relatively good about the report and the information that it provides. We'll, of course, also be providing a report with all the feedback, not just this meeting. And so apologies if the 5 doesn't work for everybody, but I will say, and on the recording, that if they have any questions through Mr. Burgos, staff is trying to be very responsive, and they can be as deep and specific as you'd like. And this is very important that the community is aware of all the information and inputs going into this decision. So apologies if that didn't work. If there is a demand for staff to be present at PAC meeting, an example, we'd be happy also to attend that. Projections were really questionable The projections were really questionable a short time ago. One of the factors that justified closing Rutherford. Have there been, or might there have been, any governance or planning changes in the district to help prevent reoccurrence? So what I can say is this, is the district relies, and every school district in the province relies on a company called Baragar systems for our short-term planning. And so they're very, very good and very, very accurate. So we know how many kids live in the Rutherford catchment as an example. And we can see the trend lines about that in the demographics. One of the weaknesses of relying solely on that, and I want to be clear, it's not Baragar's issue. It's that the district is then required to go in and physically change the development concepts, and that can be very difficult to achieve. So what we've done in these projections, which is different than the past, is we've taken the Baragar projections, and then we've also gone, and I mentioned earlier, and their entire rationale for how they came up with the enrollment projections they've taken city growth targets, the official community plan, made some assumptions about the likelihood of growth, taken the type of dwelling, and determined how many kids the type of dwelling will produce. So an apartment block produces less kids. An apartment block from 2022 produces less kids than an apartment block from 2001. A single family dwelling with a suite produces this many kids. And here's where all those single family dwellings with suites are going to be in 2030. So that's the level, a parcel level depth we've gone to in creating these projections. And so that's I guess you'd say, the extra step that was done in creating the projections today. It could be looking into making more schools cheaper to run and invest into those schools to reopen them again. Well, the district is very proactive, and the board has been very proactive on environmental upgrades to our schools to cut down on costs. But I want to be clear. As a principal cost, what a principal costs. Clerical costs, what clerical costs. Custodial costs, what custodial costs. So there's just base costs that go into a school. We could cut back on specialists in schools or the type of prep time or what have you. But in reality, the kind of inputs into schools aren't really going to change. And so barring saving money on energy, which of course we're doing, I would say that there's not a lot of ways, significant ways that we can save money. To be frank, a school of 430 kids is probably the sweet spot from an enrollment staffing perspective. One way that we could theoretically save money is ensure that we don't have schools that are 200 because we have all those inputs, but not enough kids to kind of offset. Just for the public record, we're not anticipating any changes based off of what I just said. Portables at Hammond Bay were meant to be distributed to other schools in need once the expansion is complete. So actually wouldn't be empty classrooms once the transition is made. So that is a good point. Certainly we don't need them all immediately in September, but what I'm saying is that there's going to be out of the 10 additional classrooms.
Yeah, I think there's 12 additional rooms and 5 are going to be occupied. 4 will be occupied by the portables. One of them will move into the multi-purpose room. And then the remainder of classrooms will be filled over the years as we introduce further grades. So there will be some vacant spaces in the school under the current model.
Okay, and then, oh, sorry, there was a clarification of the question I already answered. Oh, so I think I answered it with respect to schools that, how we operate schools. Please open Rutherford. We live close to it. Again, thank you. The board is going to be, I think, has seen that feedback multiple times. What are the next steps in assessing options, and when do you think we would know the decision? So the idea is after this, feedback and any questions that flow in, staff is going to write a feedback report to the board, and with a timeline. We don't quite have the end result yet. As I noted at the beginning, we are looking at September enrollments very, very closely. And so, for instance, if we overshoot in the North End, then we got to make a decision sooner. If we undershoot, however, that might be something slightly different where we might give us a little bit more time and space for the board to make such a determination. As staff, we're already contemplating the financial impact for the next budget year. So we want to have the feedback report to the board. The intention is before the end of the school year, but it could be in early fall. And then we will see exactly the timeline for decision making after that. Report is wonderful. I'm going to stop just there. Sorry. The report is wonderful. From a knowledge transition perspective is great, but I'm not sure how people give feedback on it easily. More importantly, how has this group really sought out feedback, surveys, etc., from families? The time has proven to be a bad time. So again, Dale, maybe, sorry, I'm going to read this all because I think it's important. My work is partially focused on community and school consultation. This is a fairly strong rule of thumb. I think you have all done exceptional work on considering these options. My concern in this is going to look like a rubber stamp consult. So Dale, maybe you can just talk a little bit more about the background of the feedback and how much feedback we've already had and reported to the board.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Great comment. Thanks, Serene. I wanted to also share that we opened this up a number of weeks ago through a platform called Thought Exchange, and this is our online engagement platform. We found that this has been extremely beneficial for people who can make the 5 o'clock times, for example, who can do it pretty much from anywhere at any time. And I'll give you some numbers here. Just let's see what we've got here. When we had that opened up, and we opened that up on March 21st, and we left that open until April the 1st, we had about 615 participants, which is quite a good number. So in that thought exchange, they leave their thoughts. That's an option. And we had about 453 shared thoughts. And what was even more impressive was the almost 9,000 ratings of those thoughts. And so that thought exchange in particular, we had about a 20% participation rate, I believe is that number. When you look at the number of thoughts and then the number of ratings and the number of participants, which is our target range for any of these thought exchanges. We also had opened that up, or rather we opened up email feedback as well. And so we had about 24 emails that came in through our consultation at SD68's email. And some of those people I might even see here on this Teams call right now left great feedback and also shared with the board. And so we are mindful that the virtual open houses are not a good time for everyone. And that's why we do leave other options open in which I just explained. Thank you.
And if PACs, excuse me, like I said, if PACs were wanting additional time, again, staff, it's important that people are informed for sure. And so please reach out if there's further questions, etc. And Dale, the thought exchange feedback is public, like you can see all of that, right? Or
I can make it public. I believe it was shared in. I'm getting all my things up. When did we present that? I believe that was at Business Committee, correct? Yes, I'm seeing nods. We've had a lot of consultations recently, so forgive me if I don't remember. But I believe that was shared in the Business Committee meeting that was held earlier this month. And those results are there with links to our top thoughts.
And one thing too, I do want to be transparent that staff have limited the options in the report for the sake, we think, of making a reasonable number of choices. So for instance, we didn't include the idea of dual tracking another school. We didn't include the idea of changing all of the boundaries in a way that, made them too big or impacted every single school in the district and some of those kinds of steps. So we have taken some of those steps already. However, as feedback comes in, we will incorporate if there's an option that wasn't presented or wasn't considered, we will ensure that is presented to the board for comment as well. So, okay, thank you for doing this virtually. Getting to in-person meetings is difficult, so you're very welcome. And again, we've been able, I would say, to reach out to many more people. And with this strategy, we've had some very successful opportunities. So thank you for the feedback. Okay. And there's another question coming in, I believe. Then I'll turn it over to Dale to shut her down. And just one last point while the question's coming in is we're very aware of enrollment, and we're watching that very much from a timing perspective. So right now, we have an underreport to the board. We're looking a little softer than we thought, but it's quite early in the process. But what we're really looking for is if we're going up faster than we thought, which I will say, luckily, it does not appear this year that that's the case, unless you're at NDSS.
There's a question from Sarah.
So even though all of the similar considerations, such as moving Solaire or Rock City boundaries, weren't included in consultation, would they be in the final plan? So I think we will very clearly highlight that boundaries would change in any of these scenarios. But, well, I guess perhaps with the Departure Bay expansion, but the rest of them boundaries would change, and we'll make it clear what boundaries would change. Again, based off of the numbers, it is staff's opinion that the growth is going to be such that it's a matter of when, not if, infrastructure expansion needs to happen, and boundary shifts themselves won't be sufficient. So we're happy we've got the feedback now, so we'll certainly address it. Pete, can you make sure you got a note on that? We'll certainly address that, but I don't think it's likely we would recommend to the board that that's the only solution. So maybe I'll say thank you, and thank you for listening to me talk a lot.
Okay, it doesn't look like that last question came in, Mark.
Okay, yeah. So and Sarah just clarified to say, I mean in conjunction with expansion. So yes. So yes, thank you for the comment, and I think that that's a reasonable comment. So if we expanded Departure Bay and we expanded Uplands catchment, would that solve some of our problems? Yes, it would.
Mark, just to add, part of the ministry process, as you're aware, with respect to justifying an addition on a school, we do need to look at the surrounding schools and the impact, how much capacity or overage there are in those locations. Thank you.
Oh, it looks like we've got one last person typing right now.
Well, while we're waiting, the board is starting their budget process. So I know we're asking you for feedback now, but the board's always interested in your feedback generally. The district is in pretty good shape thanks to increasing enrollment, but just throw that plug out there. Dale, what other consultation is happening right now? Because there's a lot.
Well, we
And
finished.
again, we very much appreciate you taking the time. The district has asked you a lot of questions this year, and it is important to hear back and get that feedback.
That last question did just come in, Mark.
So the funding to expand Hammond Bay was based on expanding French immersion capacity. If that school is dual track, does that have implications? It would not have implications for the capital program, no. The argument to support that is that we need additional seats, which is the case. And additional seats would be served by the dual tracking of Hammond Bay if we did it that way. So we do not foresee an impact on the capital funding.
Okay. Looks like that's the last of the questions. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. I will be throwing it over to Superintendent Scott Sawell in just a moment here. I believe there were up to 14 people that joined us as guests, and I do thank you all for taking the time to answer, or rather to ask your questions. And if you have any other questions, please email at consultation@sd68.bc.ca. I can take those questions and we can get those answered for you and share them with the board as well. Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Dale. So I'll share my gratitude. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this evening, sharing your time and your thoughts with us. And also know that while presenting here this evening, we have sort of the business side of the organization. The Learning Services Department is also working on this and understands things like the educational implications for dual track versus single track French immersion as one example. So the learning side is involved in this as well. So thanks to Mark and his team, Pete, Dale, and Tanya. And I think I'm going to give the last word to Charlene this evening. If you have anything, Charlene, our board chair.
Thanks, thank you. I guess what I would like to share with everyone who is here this evening, or maybe watching this later, first is to thank you for spending an hour of your time with us at dinner time on a weeknight. As a parent of 2 kids, I know how busy our days get as we're looking after our families. But importantly, I just want to share with everyone that through the course of the development of the long-range facilities plan, one of the board's goals was to ensure that we created a plan that always at every step took consideration into what we were hearing from the community. And so this is one of the largest things that we've consulted on that's been connected to the long range facilities plan. And we've built the plan in this way to ensure that your feedback is a strong component of what decisions we make. We are your representatives, and it's one of our biggest goals to make sure that we're representing the community as we make decisions that are in the best interest of students and our school communities. So the feedback and the time that you give the board, I hope that you feel it's well spent. I want you to know that you're heard, and the board is looking forward to going over everything in the near future to try to figure out what our next steps might be. So I just want to sincerely thank you for your time this evening. Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.